Well, hello, friends and nonprofit leaders. You know, when word gets out that the top leaders of a nonprofit in a small town have been misappropriating funds and behaving unethically, everybody hears about it. Everybody. And it's really up to the board to act quickly with integrity to find someone who can immediately step in and lead. Someone to help stop the bleeding, begin the healing process internally, and also mend relationships with donors and the community externally. Well, when today's guest, Gino DiMaio, was approached to temporarily, and I say that with air quotes, but you can't see them, temporarily lead his organization through their crisis, he was totally up for the challenge. Under his leadership, which, by the way, is no longer temporary, this organization was completely transformed from the inside out. It's Mental Health Month, and I could not let the month end without interviewing Gino DiMaio, the CEO of Sound Community Services in New London, Connecticut. Hey, have you ever wished you could hear some good news for a change? Well, I might have just what you've been hoping for. Welcome to Your Nonprofit Life, where we remove our rose-colored glasses and explore what leaders are actually doing to move their nonprofits from messy to thriving without burning out in the process. I'm Laura Zelke, Director of Member Experience for the Nonprofit Leadership Lab. Join me each week to explore the ups, downs, and whoopsie daisies of your nonprofit life. Let's get started. Welcome, Gino. It is so nice to have you here on the podcast. I'm really excited because I think that out of all of the people that I've interviewed for this, the pre-interview call, yours was the longest.
Okay.
We had so much to talk about, so welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me, Laura, and really thank you for letting me be a part of this new journey. I'm honored. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited, and you happen to have the distinction of being the first guy that I've had on the podcast. So You better represent, okay?
I'm going to try.
So before we started recording, we were comparing bookshelves, and I noticed that we both have a section dedicated to Brene Brown.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, what drew you to Brene Brown?
Well, I think maybe 5 years ago, I was kind of going through an organizational crisis, and having taken over something that was broken, I had to go out into the community and represent and try to repair and be relevant again. And I found myself being challenged quite a bit, and questions were being asked. And I then found out later, when I really tapped into her work, I was really struggling with the level of vulnerability that I needed to live with on a daily basis. You know, there was undercurrents of discomfort that was happening. And I said, I need to look at this just a little bit more. And a coaching friend of mine said, here, look at this YouTube video. And it just, boom, struck a chord with me. And I started to listen to books on tapes and actually reading. And then I did some online workshops. And a leadership group that I'm a part of, Leadership Greater Hartford, one of their trainers is actually a certified trainer. So a lot of the work I did with them really brought out some of the Brene Brown training in lifetime. It was that vulnerability. It was, well, this is not easy stuff, even though I like it and I like others to be vulnerable. And I know the healing that takes place clinically. Being out there and having to be vulnerable, I just got sick of it. And I thought there's something's not right. So It was a godsend that it came my way.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a little bit later about that whole crisis situation. My introduction to Brene Brown happened many years ago. I was struggling with perfectionism. Okay, I don't know that you can ever not struggle with it when you're a recovering perfectionist, but she wrote a book called The Gifts of Imperfection, which pretty much changed my life. And so once I read that, then I went back and read her first book, And then I've read every book that she's put out since then. And, now she's got a podcast, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But the books have been so life impacting for me.
Yeah.
Like you said, the vulnerability and understanding that that's actually courage and how that looks.
Yeah.
And it's not about oversharing as much as it is about being willing to step out and acknowledge issues.
Yeah. Well, modeling that behavior, though, I've had managers, leaders in my agency who have openly admitted during in the middle of like executive meetings, yeah, I need to like be honest and be vulnerable right now and say, I used to think this way about you before, but like my opinions have changed. And it really was, I couldn't come to grips with my own vulnerability about my weaknesses. And I sit there and I think, wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah. And what I love about Brene Brown is that she provides a vocabulary for us to be able to have those kinds of conversations. One of the men that I work with, Scott, he and I have gotten to the place that we know we can say, I need to have a Brene Brown kind of conversation with you. And we know what that means. It's just that ability to have those difficult conversations with total respect and vulnerability and authenticity, and knowing that you're all on the same team, but that you're able to have those difficult conversations. And I love the common vocabulary that she brings into it.
Yeah.
I love your bookshelves.
Thank you. I love my bookshelves too. They're like my prized possessions. I do lend them out occasionally, but they used to be in my office and then I brought them home and I'm like, this is really where I have the best energy. And they remind me, because I work nonstop, and I look at them and I remind myself there's something still to be completed. You know you're a book fiend when you buy a book and then you read it and you go to put it away and you realize that you bought it before and it's in your bookcase.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, so what's the message here? I need to really live this a little bit more.
Yeah, really. That's good. I tend to be one who writes in it and highlights, and it's like I cannot do an e-reader. I've tried. I don't retain what I do when I have the paper, the book in my hand and dialogue with the author back and forth.
As I've gotten older, though, I do listen to audiobooks.
Yes.
And I then determine whether they are page worthy. And then I'll go out and buy the book so that I can then mark it up. Like the second there's something in there that's totally useful, I will say, oh, I need to buy that book.
Yes.
I mean, I did that with Joan's book and I'm like, well, I got to have that book. And then I'll start reading it and then implementing something.
Yeah. I have to say, this is why I've so enjoyed talking with you, because I'm so there with you. So Gino, let me ask you this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization? You're the executive director of Sound Community Services.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. And you're up in Connecticut, but you have a pretty strong online presence. So why don't you kind of share what your organization does?
Sure. So we're in southeastern Connecticut, right at the end of Long Island Sound, and it's in New London, Connecticut. And we're a behavioral health agency. We provide mental health and substance disorder treatment in a very natural, holistic, integrated manner. And we do this in the form of psychiatric services, therapeutic therapy types of services. We have 2 clinics that see about 1,300 people a month.
Wow.
We have 3 different layers or 3 different levels of case management services, 3 rather large residential programs, a social rehab clubhouse model for folks to just drop in and get socialization and community enrichment and community engagement. And over the past maybe 5 years, we've started on a track with young adult services, specifically 18 to 25-year-olds who are at risk and homeless. And we do that in the form of 2 really robust residential programs. And we have this program called the Access Center, which is another social rehab program, but really there's no criteria for getting in. The criteria is that you might be homeless, you're 18 to 25, you're couch surfing, you bombed out of the criminal justice system or you bombed out of high school. And, it's just a place to make a connection, an emotional connection. And then after that connection happens, then we loop in some clinical skills. We might do a formal intake, and we have specialized groups around social and emotional behavior, positive relationships, how to get a job. And then they become ambassadors for other people. We see about 40 or 50 a day, but we have about 300 people on our roster at any given moment. And they come and they go and they show up. We've had some really amazing success stories. We're a wraparound service organization. So anyone that comes in for a particular service can then touch base into other programs.
Wow. So it's quite the operation that you have going on up there. And, I'm a huge fan. I follow you guys on Instagram. You're one of my favorite organizations to follow because the graphics that you put out are beautiful, but the message behind it is just always uplifting and helpful. And you can see that there's a lot of intention going behind it. A lot of people are on social media, but they don't necessarily leverage it in the way that it works. And you are using it intentionally to not only move your mission forward, but also just communicate when support groups are happening or any pivots that you've needed to do during this crisis and things like that.
Yeah, we love our Instagram. And we love that you follow our Instagram. And when you told me about it, I sent your message to Laura. There's a lady that works for me. Her name is Laura, who's on maternity leave. And we work together on the social media, the messaging. And I'm like, oh my God, you got to read this email. Someone on a national level loves your Instagram. So she was really quite excited.
Well, we Lauras, we have to stick together. So, Gino, let me ask you this. Why the focus on 18 to 25?
Well, it's a population that if we do not do something about, they're going to end up being the next institutionalized group of people, meaning they have nowhere to go. They're not able to get jobs. They don't want to drive cars or get their license. And the clinical services are not readily available to them, nor do they feel like they want to engage anywhere. They think that this is the new normal and that they don't need any help. So we really like to focus on that area. The population that we're seeing actually really is a developmentally disabled population that also has an Axis 1 mental health diagnosis. And I don't know if they're actually with the right organization, meaning the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. They were mental health hospitals. They never were really gauged to do work in the community, especially skills development, IQ testing, adaptive testing, and the development of applied behavioral analysis that needs to help someone with a developmental disability move forward. So we saw the niche for that population and, made some proposals to our funder, and we were able to build pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's just a really interesting target group of people. And the reason that I'm asking about it is May is foster care month and it's also mental health month. And I know that there is an issue with kids who are in the foster care system and then they age out and then they don't really have resources. So are you also helping some of those people as well? Or is it mainly just the developmentally disabled?
Well, so it's anyone that has a disability, whether it's a developmental disability or a psychiatric or an emotional disability, or people that really just come from really dysfunctional homes. They've been in the foster care system, they've aged out of the DCF system, and those are the ones that we see. I call them the Department of Gray Area, meaning there's really, because of the way our systems are set up, they missed something. And now they're 22 years old and they have no services. They don't have any skills. They want to go to college. They want to finish high school. They want to get their driver's license, and there's really no help.
And they're
for
just
them.
kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so your organization is filling that gap for them. And what I heard you say is they can come in and just get connected first. And it's so
Yeah.
interesting. I was interviewing someone this morning, Julie Beam from the Attachment and Trauma Network. Now they're helping parents who have young children to help kind of rewire the brain. They've gone through the trauma as kids. So it almost sounds to me like what you're addressing is kids that have maybe that attachment and trauma that maybe never did get the care that they needed to rewire the brain. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Without a doubt. So we do trauma-informed care. And so we'll do groups for kids. Well, I still call them kids. I'm sorry. I can't.
No, I mean, yeah.
You know, we do groups like Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. Now that sounds a lot better than grief and loss, grief, loss, and transition. Like you're not going to get a young adult who thinks he's really cool to show up for that kind of group. Here Today, Gone Tomorrow is, yep, you know what? I had this in my life. This happened. This was gone. I never got over the trauma of that. And that does resonate with me. Guys who run the streets, you know, who've lost friends to violence, folks that were physically and sexually abused, they can relate to these groups and they want to be normal. It's like they're smart enough to know that they don't have the skills, but they're not smart enough to know where to get the skills. And so we've been pretty successful about engaging them. I love this group. I am very connected to our clients, and we have thousands of clients. But in my building, we have many of these programs are in my building where the majority of them are out in the community. So I just love going down to these sites and really just jumping in and talking about my own life experience. And, you know, someone might say, well, you're just cool. You're a CEO and I want to be like you. And I'll say, yeah, but did you know that when I was 13, I was almost homeless. So hadn't it been for the grace of God for this particular family member who saved me, I was you. You know, and they make that connection. And our staff are all like that. We really kind of lay it out there for people so they know that we're no different than you. We've all been there.
And that just kind of ties back into our conversation that we were having earlier about vulnerability. Isn't it interesting that it's easy for you to go in and be vulnerable with the people you serve, but then when you're having to go to the community, it's not so easy. So let me ask you this. How did you come to be at Sound Community Services? Was this part of your plan all along? Or like, were you always thinking that you would end up in nonprofit? You know, how did that go?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about that question. And I think the real shift from not really being sure about life and where I want to go and where can I be valuable in life. I lost my father many, many, many years ago, and he died of cancer. And what really amazed me was the hospice workers. And back then, hospice was a very kind of a small grassroots kind of movement. And afterwards, while needing an internship, I was able to work with them to create a bereavement counseling program for volunteers. And that was it. I was done. I was like right in the counseling, making social change sphere for the rest of my life. I've always been like a grassroots guy. I'm a grassroots thinker. Give me something broken and I can probably fix it. I'm a visionary by nature, which my staff will tell you is dangerous because I'm that squirrel bouncing off the wall and they'll kind of pull me back down to earth. But I had a pretty lengthy career in state government. It was the Department of Developmental Services, and I worked on projects where I was able to research the negative implications for someone with a developmental disability who comes in contact with the criminal justice system, how that impacts the criminal justice system, but ultimately, how did it affect our agency from a financial perspective because our legislature never really gave enough dollars for these high-risk people. So I was very blessed that I had someone that said, hey, that's a great idea, go do some research. And then 20 years later, it was a $25 million organization that created laws, changed the way that we view competencies to stand trial for folks with developmental disabilities, changed the way that courts did sentencing, changed commitment laws, and that sort of thing. That was a 20-year career for me.
So I want to do two things. One is I want to have you define what you mean when you say developmental disabilities. And then I also want to know how you then made the transition from your state career over into the nonprofit sector specifically.
Yeah.
But like when you say developmental disabilities, what does that include?
So back then, when I was working back then, it was the Department of Mental Retardation. So people were defined under the law as sub-level IQ, running concurrent with adaptive functioning, documented during the developmental period. That was the legal criteria to be considered eligible for DMR services. Politically correct way of describing it is DDS. I'm still old school and I still say DMR, but I don't want to offend anybody.
Right.
But I became someone that worked with providers that needed to develop group homes, apartment programs, community living arrangements, and it was all funded by the state, but I funded nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
And so that's where the connection to the nonprofit world came. And I thought to myself, I really love what they do because they're not riddled with all of these regulations and things. I mean, yeah, they have to be compliant with data, blah, blah. But yeah, they can be more creative. I kind of like that piece of it. So I took an early retirement at 48. And I did 2 years of consulting in the city of Hartford as a nonprofit. And I developed juvenile justice and truancy court prevention programs in the city of Hartford. We did juvenile review boards, and it was just absolutely mind-blowing experience. So here were kids getting arrested for throwing a book at a teacher, and they would have to come through the JRB. The legal aspect of it really didn't matter. It was that emotional connection, which then got you the ability to serve and make changes. The sad part about the whole career was I did all this great work everywhere in my state, and I never ever fulfilled a vision in my own community. Mm-hmm. Like I drove an hour to 2 hours every day, and I stayed where I lived because I loved the ocean. But then I thought, it's time for me to do something close to home. So I put in for a job at this agency, and they were looking for a director of residential services. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. I can do that. I've funded this agency before and others like it. And I came on board and we put a couple of new programs in place based on the experience of working with developmental disabilities and mental illness, both departments. During the time, there was a problem with the C-suite of the organization. It was a very public thing, a lot of shame around misappropriation of funds and just unethical related behavior. And my board, our board, I didn't know the board at the time. They asked me, they knew my background and my history, and asked if I would temporarily lead them through crisis. I said yes, and here I am today.
And how long ago was that?
So that was about 6 years ago.
Okay. So you came into this just looking for the ability to impact your own local community.
Yeah.
And got pulled into a crisis that you weren't planning on. That was not part of the plan. You were retired. You're retired. Yeah. You're just like doing this to help out the community. And you said that it was very public. So you were coming in And would you consider where you are, does it have that small community feel so everybody knows what everybody else
Yeah.
is
Oh,
doing,
God,
that
yes.
kind of thing?
Yeah,
And so when you
unfortunately.
say it's public, like it was, everybody knew what was going
Yes.
on. And
Yeah.
so then you get pulled in. That's kind of risky on some level. Do you feel? And had you at that point established yourself? Like, did people know who you were, or did it feel like, who's Gino?
Yeah. So the most important thing was the folks that actually fund us, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Service. We're about an $11 million organization. We have 150 employees. I think the saving grace was that those people that I worked close with knew me personally. They knew my history and they felt comfortable keeping us afloat. They really could have any time just said, we're done. We're going to split you up into small pieces and do an RFP and be done with it. But they did not. And I was really grateful for that. But there was a lot of repair that needed to happen. I've been this person that believes that you manifest what you want in your life, whether it's good or bad. And I thought, so why is this showing up? What is the purpose? What is the meaning? And I just took it as that kind of a challenge, like it was a
Yeah.
broken, sick organization.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about it like that, because I do find that when leaders are faced with a crisis, they tend to either lean into it
Yeah.
and grow from it and develop through it and figure it out, or they shrink back
Yeah.
and lead from a position of fear. And one has a really good outcome, and the
Yeah.
other, I think, almost makes it worse.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like you're the kind of person that when you had that crisis, or, the organization had the crisis and they're bringing you in to help, you're looking at it going, okay, what you just said, how did I get here? But yet
Yeah.
at the same time, you're looking at it going, wait a minute, that's the wrong mindset. It's not how did I get here as much as it is, why am I here right
Yeah.
now? What is
Absolutely.
my purpose, right? What am
Yeah.
I going to do? This is not only a learning for you because you learned a whole new level of vulnerability with the public that you didn't know you were going to have or ever have in your life, right?
Yeah.
Especially in a small community, I think it's got to be hard because it's not like they brought you in from the outside and said, come fix us and then you can go. You live there. This is your deal.
Yeah.
When you're going out and dealing with all this, it's you. You're the face of
Yeah.
that. And they said it was temporary. Is it still temporary?
No, I've been permanent for about 4 years, and I have about
Okay.
5 more years to go on my employment contract. I just re-signed for another 5 years.
Okay.
So they're actually really quite thrilled at the way things have
Sure.
gone, and we formulated such a wonderful relationship. They're wonderful people, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest challenge that you had as far as this very public thing that your organization went through? Was there kind of a turning point for you when things started shifting back in the more positive direction?
Yeah, so I actually had a plan, a strategy when it came time to look at this. I looked at it very clinically, like the organization was dealing with guilt and shame and embarrassment. And when I looked at people that actually did the work every single day, when I would go out and observe clinicians and observe case managers and residential programs, I thought to myself, wow, the resiliency of these people is amazing because on the one-to-one basis, they give unbelievable service. They give their heart and their soul into this service. So that made me feel really comfortable knowing that the clients were being well taken care of. I then needed to do a lot of extracting those stories, writing blogs, doing posts, getting articles from our local newspaper. And it slowly started to change the perception of the organization, at the same time making people feel so much better about themselves and who they're associated with, to the degree that they then started to become engaged. Now, this was a 3 to 4 year period of time. again, looking for people that are leaders within the organization. How do you create upward mobility? I physically brought in a lot of trainings that I did myself to get people engaged, and slowly things started to change. I frame it this way. If you're ever familiar with the Al-Anon movement, we're a recovery-based organization. So we have groups for alcoholics and groups for addicts and groups for people who live with people that are struggling from dysfunctions and that sort of thing. It was the same methodology. When you want something to change so badly, and then all of a sudden it does change, people don't know what their identity is any longer. And so a lot of people opted to not be on the side of, well, I now need to be accountable, and I now need to be responsible. I now need to be creative. Oh my God, here's this guy asking me, if you could do anything in the next 5 years, what would your life look like, and how can I get you there? It took a while for people to grasp that level of autonomy. And I think the turning point was last year, we were actually voted as top workplace in Connecticut.
Wow.
In our mid-size category. And it came from an outside person to do surveys of the organization. I was just totally blown away by that whole thing.
First of all, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
To go from a major public crisis to being voted one of Connecticut's best places to work has got to feel really good.
Yeah.
Affirmation of your leadership. I have a question, and that is, they brought you in for the crisis. 3 to 4 years seems like a long haul.
Yeah.
How did you keep yourself motivated and looking forward for that long? I think some people think that, crisis management, well, you have the crisis, you put out the fire and then you just get back to normal.
Yeah, no.
In a year or something. Maybe a year they could keep going, but 3 to 4 years?
Yeah.
How did you keep yourself going, and how did you keep your people going? And let me ask you this too. Did you lose people along the way? And did you have to replace them?
We did lose people along the way that said, I'm not willing to be accountable. I'm not willing to put my client first. I just thought it was a job, and I didn't know that it was a lifelong service opportunity to others. We really started with core values, developing new core values, developing a manifesto, being unbelievably clear about what our expectations were. You as a human being, you as a clinician, you as a coworker, what does that look like, and what do we expect from people? And maybe 10% of the folks did not really, they liked the way that it was to some degree. We've then elevated people beautifully to the degree that they're now my leaders. They're on my executive team. They're all promoted from within. But I think what kept me going, so I'm a lifelong learner. I'm an older guy, and I spend hours a day in education. And I looked at this as my arena, right? To get in there and do the hard work, just like Bren says. And it was really like just a challenge for me to move it forward. Yeah, it was very difficult. I lived it 24 hours a day. But right now, the outcomes that are just so beautiful, when I watch some interaction between someone and I hear them talking about we and our core values, and this is what we believe in, is that behavior consistent with our core value? I look and I'm in awe, and I say, okay, all that was definitely worth it. It was really hard. And I think the most important thing was, it was my mission to move these people, meaning our staff, to a place where they can feel good about themselves. And I think doing that really hard work and putting the focus on the staff and developing them and being there with them, that was the significant change. And really, we don't really speak of it anymore. It's like nobody really remembers it but me when I get into a bad place in my head. And that does happen sometimes. But most people, they don't even think about it. They just think about where can we go now? What can we do now?
Yeah. And that's a complete culture shift
Yes.
from where it was when you got there to where it is now. And how are you setting that up? You have another 5 years, and then after that, you may or may not renew.
Right.
So, without tipping your hand, though, how do you continue to develop a pipeline of leadership
Yeah.
so that in the eventuality, we're in the middle of crisis. The whole idea that we can even make plans,
Yeah.
it's kind of, I don't think about it too much because we just honestly, we don't know what the future holds. But as you look at your people right now, how are you setting up the organization so that in the eventuality that Gino is not there anymore,
Yeah.
that they continue on the path that they're on?
Yeah. So I think one of the most amazing things, and this has been difficult for me to let go of, I have a team of people that have all been elevated from within.
Mhm.
Now they're all really smart people, they're clinicians, they've been leaders of other areas of the agency. I have developed something called a leadership academy, and we do very formalized training in areas like the Enneagram, and we do intentional energetic presence. I teach people a lot about like how to run an agency, and that's fun, but really it's the human side of people that I love
Mhm.
to develop. And they're very used to having to come into a meeting and we're going to do 5 minutes of meditation before we start this meeting. And everyone's going to tell me what their energy level is today. And what do I need to do to have you change your energy level because your staff are depending on you. And so I think I've created this pipeline of leaders. Now I sit back like the crisis and I watched a group of people put together a continuity of operations plan. And I'm sitting there in awe. I'm guiding them, but they're just like running with it. And I thought to myself, well, look at you go. Like you really don't need me. But yet they do. But I'm now looking at that and I'm saying, so that's normal. That's natural. That's what you really want from your leaders. You want them to be able to say, no, 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 I got this. Or that idea that you just gave us was really stupid and
Mhm.
they challenge me. And I like to be challenged. But I do think you have to put your emphasis in the people. I tell my staff and I tell people when we hire folks, and we do an extensive orientation. I spend the first half of the first day with all the new employees. And I tell them that when you come here, your personal and professional development is my business. And I take it very, very personally. So people know they're going to do some really hard work. Like we have people articulate their why, which can be a very difficult process outlining your history and the timeline and what are the factors that have made you the person that you are. And they're just used to it now. And so I think we've become a really, really wonderful, healthy planet that you might want to live on if you were going to fly away in a jet
Mhm.
and you were going to land in a culture. You know, everyone's got their issues, but for the most part, we're a very kind, caring organization, but they take care of business.
Yeah. And really having a tremendous impact on the community. And, I wonder your model, is it something that you've thought about maybe taking it and training other organizations
Yeah.
besides just keeping it all right there in your local community?
Yeah, so it might be the next step. You know, I love leadership development. I would love the area that we live in. We're not a cohesive group, and there is a lack of knowledge, humanistic type of leadership. I'm associated with an organization in Hartford. They're about an hour or so away, Leadership Greater Hartford, and they originated as a group of people that were dealing with racial rioting in the city of Hartford in the 70s. And they took a leadership approach to solving a social problem. They then morphed into a leadership training academy. And I do a lot of work with them They have a summit program. I just recently finished with maybe 15 other CEOs around the state, and we formulated really quite a bond, but we did some really deep, heavy work on ourselves. And I would love to develop something like that in my region. I do a lot of coaching for people.
Mm-hmm.
What I'll do is, just to keep my act sharp, I will do some coaching for an organization. They'll make a contribution to my organization. And so we all feed each other.
Sure.
But I am finding that an agency might call me and they said, well, I just heard you did this training on the 5 dysfunctions of teams, or the inability to feel safe in a meeting. And we haven't had a training in 36 years. Could you come in? And I'm like, that's sad. Yes, I'll be there.
Wow. Yeah. And I can only imagine the impact that you would have in an organization like that. And I just think that there is something to be said for someone who goes through life, has all these experiences, and yet continues to learn.
It's 2 to 3, maybe 4 hours a day. It starts at 6 a.m. and goes to 8, and then usually 9 to 10:30, I finish it, and I crave knowledge. It will never change.
Right. And it's not just knowledge that you crave, though. It seems to me like you're looking for ways to increase your impact, to make a bigger difference. To work on yourself, but also so that you can share it with others to help them. So the big challenge right now is that you've developed these leaders, but getting them then to be developing leaders under them. Right? Like it has to keep passing down. It can't just be you developing the leaders. It has to be like the culture of learning and developing and improving. And I just think that it's such a good model, for the longevity of organizations and the ability to pivot. So here we are in the first global pandemic of our generation, or many generations even past, and the level of technology has never been where it is. So the disruption is pretty huge. And then, we have the technology to go online, but when you're dealing with people who have developmental disabilities and maybe an inability to really comprehend all of the changes and the reasons for the changes and the disruption that causes to a routine, and just the mental health that goes with that, the issues that can come up, to have a meeting where, what'd you call it, continuation of services plan, where they just sit down and do that.
We got the word here in Connecticut. I was actually attending somebody else's strategic planning session, and we were in the middle of our own strategic planning sessions. The state decided to close schools, and then other things were closing. We're an essential organization. So really what my funder was telling me was, you've got to be compliant with your contractual obligations, but you need to think creatively about how to serve them. So we had a 2-year goal of doing telepsychiatry and teletherapy. Within 2 weeks, we had it up and running.
Wow.
In 2 weeks, we had all the technology, all of the regulations within the electronic medical record so that we could get paid, the HIPAA security. We had 4 prescribing people working remotely, maybe 10 therapists. The only ones that really could not work home are the residential programs. And, we have quite a few of them. We got all of our case managers to work remotely. There's been great opportunity, though, during this pandemic. As bizarre as this is going to sound, I'm keeping a running journal about areas of opportunity that I see, because I don't expect life to ever really be the same again, and I'm okay with that.
Yep.
What we've noticed is our population, the chronic and persistent mental illness, which are the post-institutional folks, so maybe they're like 50 to 70, we had a typical no-show rate of about 28%. And in the industry with that population, it's a little bit high, but not overly excessive.
Mm-hmm.
We're noticing now that people are getting therapy at home. We're under 8%.
Wow.
So the engagement is just wonderful. And the clients who struggle with transportation, because we live in an area where we have transportation, but for them to access it is challenging. So we've done really well there. We've also noticed that there are other ways of maybe merging different kinds of positions together, just operational procedures and that sort of thing. We're like really excited to get into, I promised them not for another 2 weeks, to get into this planning mode of opportunities. And we're very excited about that. The people that we're providing the service to, though, they're very scared. They don't want to go outside. They don't know what to believe. Their anxiety level is kind of going through the roof. There are caregivers at home. They know there are children there. They know the situations may not be safe. We're encountering a lot of challenges, and our clinicians, lovely people, are dealing with a new level of trauma. Mm-hmm. So I believe we're going to have a new population that's going to have very trauma-related illnesses and folks that are re-traumatized again, and then maybe clinicians that are dealing with anecdotal levels of trauma based on their own experience.
Sure. Well, and just in my home here, we've been talking about the first responders, but really like the doctors and nurses who are really being traumatized right now. In certain hospitals with just the bombardment of terminally ill, like no matter what they do, these people are passing, and it's just scary to watch. And I have to say that it's so good to know that there are organizations such as yours, even though a lot of your focus is on the developmentally disabled, but to know that you also have those services available just in your community, it's comforting to know, because you're right. And it's been pretty much across the board. Everyone that I've talked to coming out of Child Abuse Awareness Month into mental health, it's across the board. There's just this concern of what's going on with the shelter at home order in unhealthy situations, and that there's probably going to be a surge in the need of mental health services and trauma-informed services after this crisis. So let me ask you this, Gino, you said you're giving them 2 weeks and then you guys are going to start looking at the opportunities.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Like, did you have anything that you needed to reschedule for the rest of this year? Or how's your year changing as a result of this pandemic?
Let me just make a correction, though, on one thing. So probably 95% of my population that we serve they are duly diagnosed, meaning they have mental illness and substance abuse. That developmental disability population is a very small percentage. They just happen to fall into the mental health world. If they were handled appropriately during school transitions, it probably would be with a different agency. So it's given us the ability to learn, for us to kind of grow in a new area. But your question, we're a very social group, and we really love to be around each other. And we have a lot of celebration type of events. We get together with our clients. We have coffee trucks and pizza trucks, and we celebrate everything. That's been put on hold. All of our meetings are done through Microsoft Teams. And I just have every manager invite me to every one of their meetings, and then I just selectively drop in, not because I want to know what they do, but because I can get an opportunity to say, I can't believe what I'm listening to, and just thank you so much for the work that you do. There was a guy yesterday who does case management for homeless people, and the objective is they get a voucher from the federal government and they can get into an apartment. And in the middle of this pandemic, he's moving somebody who's been in a tent for 2 years, cleaning out an apartment, getting her ready to move into an apartment on Friday. And they're talking so matter-of-factly. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're amazing. I can't believe, first of all, I can't believe you're not telling me about this so I can then write a story about you and all your awesomeness, which I will do after they get me a picture of them with the tent. And it just continues to go. I can drop into the next meeting, but we were doing strategic planning. And it's a different kind of thing now because we have a holistic organization. So core values and mission and vision and new goals, it's all relevant now. And I need that human collaboration in front of me to be able to do it. We're trying to do it virtually, and I'm taking it one step at a time. But, that's been a really big adjustment as well. But I got to tell you, we have really learned to be agile.
Yeah.
Like people are still getting served in such an immense way that it just blows my mind.
Yeah, the creativity and the nimbleness that we've observed in the nonprofit sector over the last 6 weeks, who knew?
I know.
I mean, that whole we've never done it that way before kind of went out the window, didn't it?
Yeah.
With a lot of people. And I have to say, I can identify with your desire to just kind of drop in and peek in on the different folks you work with. That's how I feel about this podcast in a way, is that I get to drop in on different leaders and the organizations that we serve inside the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and say, look what you're doing. It's amazing. Why didn't you tell me this? I get to sit here and kind of shine a spotlight and say, look at what they're doing up in Connecticut. This is amazing. So it's really, really exciting. And I have a question as we wrap up here. What's the best way for people to find out more about your organization?
Sure. They can go to www.soundcommunityservices.org and they can find us on Instagram, SoundCT, and they can email me directly, g.demeo@soundct.org anytime. I love to talk to people and I love to hear what other leaders are doing. And I love it when someone says, I'm struggling with this. Could you help me? Anytime. Absolutely. And you know what? Kudos to you for doing this because we leaders, we're like horrible at recognizing the goodness that we actually do and the impact that we have. We don't celebrate ourselves very much. And so this is a wonderful platform. I can go from being very uplifting to later today, and I might say to my wife, I'm the worst leader in the world. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. And then one of my managers or vice presidents might say, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
We want to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think part of it is also maybe the curse of being a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of it is if you think you've arrived, then you probably wouldn't continue learning. And so we know it's a lifelong journey. We're learning, we're tweaking, we're getting better. And the downside of getting better means there was something that we needed to improve. But, we do it. And I just want to thank you for everything that you're doing, not only in your local community. I know it was your desire to move from state to local. And yet with the reach of the internet, you are touching lives much further than just your local community. And I look forward to seeing this continue to develop because you're definitely on a trajectory to take your model and just to keep with your leadership Greater Hartford. We kind of right now are in the need of leadership Greater America.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I just want to affirm all of that in you, that you have what it takes to really have your ripple effect further out than just the local.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the message, right? So maybe it's our job to take it up another notch and to be leaders in the community or use our organizations in a method where we can create change because we're not seeing great leadership in the world today. We're seeing a serious eroding of core values or no values at all. And I'm very concerned about the world. And that might be a big apple to bite into, but there's some synergy somewhere. I'm looking for it.
Well, keep looking, please, because we need you.
I will.
We need you. We need your brains. We need the impact that you're having. And when you look at what you've done, and that may be part of your process, right, is to sit back. Okay, you're always looking toward the future,
Yeah.
but maybe give yourself a little bit of time where you can say, okay, I'm going to look at what we've done since we've been here. What
Yeah.
of this is replicatable? And the mission's vision statement, the mission statement, the core values, everybody says to do that. Like that should be the no-brainer, right? But
Yeah.
I think that maybe what it is there comes a time when you have to revisit.
Yeah.
Right? You go back and you can't just say, well, we did this mission statement 25 years ago and we're not revising the vision. That's ridiculous because the world has completely changed.
Oh, I agree with you.
Before the pandemic, now it's even more so. And in a way, you can look at this as the end of the world as we know it, or you can look at it as the birth pangs of what's coming next. And what's coming next is exciting. And there is more of a synergistic worldview coming, collaboration. Like this is where we're headed. We're done with silos. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Oh, that's a great phrase because I do believe that one of the opportunities or outcomes was breakdown of silos.
Yeah.
And, siloism is the death of a really good organization.
Right.
And it's been a great time to have people like give me their impressions of core values because you look at what happened a month ago, look at those behaviors, and now look at really the world that you want to see. It should be very easy for you to figure out what a core value is and real clear, live, actionable definitions.
Right.
Each one is kind of fun.
Yeah. And it's like, here's the vision. Now let's go make it happen.
Right on.
And I think there's just, like you said, there's an opportunity, not just for your organization, but for the whole world, really, to re-envision what we want the world to be coming out of this. I just want to thank you again for everything that you're doing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I will see you in the village.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. To access the show notes or share feedback on this podcast and link over to our socials, visit our website at yournonprofitlife.com. That's yournonprofitlife.com. And hey, if you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you're going to love The Village. It's our exclusive online community where we take what we're learning in the Nonprofit Leadership Lab and apply it. We take it to the next level with live Q&As, boot camps, online book clubs, and legit support from experts committed to helping you extend your nonprofit life. By the way, since we're just getting started, it would mean the world to us if you'd subscribe to the podcast and leave a great review on iTunes. The reviews will help us get the podcast in front of more people as we try to take the whole sector from messy to thriving. See you next time.